Hello, family. Thank you once again for joining us for our devotional thought. Today I am looking at Matthew chapter 19 and verse 26. The topic that we are going to be talking about here is dealing with the impossible. How do you face impossible situations in your life? A story is told about Henry Ford, about how one time he had this grand idea that he was going to come up with an engine that today we'll be calling a V8 engine. So he spoke to his draftsman and got them to start working on this engine, this type of an engine that will be V and an eight cylinders basically. And so his draftsmen went to work and they came up with their ideas and they had to submit them to the engineers. And so after 6 months with the engineers trying to figure out how this thing was going to work out, the story continues to tell us that Henry Ford got back to them and said, "Gentlemen, how is it going?" And they said, whoever made these drawings clearly had no engineering inclinations. This person has nothing that's close to engineering. So he didn't know what he was doing basically. And so they said, kindly Mr. Ford, what you are suggesting is impossible. And then he said, oh good, then go ahead and make it. And so it was kind of like, what are you trying to say? We said this is impossible to do. But he told them, no, get to work. Work on it until you get it. And so with frustration, they went on and continued to work. And the struggle continued for some time. And eventually, they ended up getting it. But the question that I want to pose before you and I this evening or this morning is, how do you deal with impossible situations? Do you persist like Henry Ford persisted that his engineers ended up being able to make these V8 engines that we have today? Let's see what Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 19 and verse 26. And it reads, "But Jesus looked at them and said, 'With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible.'" So with God, all things are possible, but with men, these things that we get to face in this world are impossible. So I don't know what kind of situation you might be facing that might be seeming to be impossible in your life today. But what I know is that God has shown in a number of different ways in the Bible that He can do the impossible, the possible out of impossibility. So I want to recommend you today that you take a time to try God with whatever circumstances that you have before you. Whatever the challenge you have before you today, you can trust that God can bring you through the circumstance. One of the interesting quotes that I found is by A.W. Tozer, and it reads, "God is looking for people through whom He can do the impossible. What a pity that we plan only the things we can do by ourselves." So Tozer here is telling us that God is looking for man who He can do the impossible with. So God is looking for you, God is looking for me, rather to be able to do the impossible, to turn the impossibilities, the things that are impossible in our lives today, into possibilities. But unfortunately, we are limited by our abilities because we want to do that which we can, the things that we can only do. And by the way, just to reiterate on this point that Jesus is dealing with this young man who is struggling with the concept of letting go of his riches and embracing the salvation that he can have in God. So I want to encourage you today that you will take this to heart today, that you do not hold on to things of this world, things that derail you from following Jesus wholeheartedly because you know what? Jesus wants to do the impossible with you just as much as he wants to do them with me. Have a blessed rest of the week.